Clint Eastwood stood at the check-in counter of Pacific Airlines at Los Angeles International Airport. The morning sun streamed through the large windows. He wore a simple gray jacket and dark pants. At 91 years old, his face showed the lines of age, but his eyes remained sharp and clear. He handed his ID and confirmation number to the young woman behind the counter. "Good morning, Mr. Eastwood," said Kelly Adams, the airline employee. Her fingers tapped quickly on the keyboard. She looked up with a smile, but then her face changed. A small frown appeared. "Just one moment, sir." She picked up a phone and spoke quietly. Clint waited patiently. He was flying to New York for a meeting about a new movie project. He had booked his first-class ticket 3 months ago. At his age, the extra space made flying more comfortable for his tall frame. He glanced at his watch. The flight would board in an hour. Kelly put down the phone. Her smile now looked forced. "Mr. Eastwood, I'm very sorry, but there seems to be a problem with your reservation." "What kind of problem?" Clint asked. His voice was calm but deep, the same voice that had made him famous in dozens of films. "Your first-class seat is no longer available." Kelly looked down at her computer screen, avoiding his eyes. "We had to make some last-minute changes to accommodate other passengers." "I booked and paid for first class," Clint said simply. He didn't raise his voice. He never needed to. "Yes, sir, I understand. The airline had to accommodate some VIP guests from our partner company. I can offer you a seat in economy, plus a voucher for a future flight." Behind Clint, a line of passengers was growing. Some people began to recognize him. A few pulled out phones to take pictures. Clint ignored them. His focus remained on the problem at hand. "Who authorized this change?" he asked. "Our regional manager, sir. I'm very sorry for the inconvenience." Kelly handed him a new boarding pass for seat 32B, in the middle of economy class. "We've also added a $200 voucher to your account for your next flight with us." Clint took the boarding pass without argument. He had learned long ago to pick his battles. This wasn't the time or place. "Thank you," he said, and walked away from the counter. As he moved through the airport, he noticed Steve Rogers, one of the airline's managers, watching from a distance. Steve quickly looked away when Clint's eyes met his. Clint made a mental note of the man's face and name tag. In the waiting area near his gate, Clint found a quiet corner and took a seat. He pulled out his phone and called his assistant, Mary Wilson. "Mary, could you contact my lawyer, Paul Bennett? Tell him I need to speak with him tomorrow in New York." Clint spoke quietly. "Is everything okay?" Mary asked. "Pacific Airlines bumped me from first class, gave my seat to someone else." "That's terrible. Do you want me to call them right now? I'm sure once they realize who you are—" "No," Clint cut her off gently. "Let's handle this differently." After ending the call, Clint watched as other passengers arrived at the gate. A family with young children sat nearby. The mother looked tired as she tried to keep her 2 boys from running around. The father juggled, bags and snacks, looking equally exhausted. "Flight 372 to New York will begin boarding in 15 minutes, announced a voice over the speakers. "We invite our first-class passengers to board at this time." Clint watched as about 20 people lined up. Among them was a group of men in expensive suits laughing loudly. One of them, a man with a red tie, pointed at Clint and whispered something to his companions. They all laughed again. When economy passengers were called to board, Clint joined the longer line. He noticed how the same airline staff who had been so apologetic at the check-in counter now avoided looking at him. He boarded the plane and made his way down the narrow aisle to row 32. His seat was between 2 other passengers. On the aisle sat George Hill, a middle-aged man with a laptop who recognized Clint immediately. "Mr. Eastwood." "Wow, I can't believe it," George said too loudly. "I'm your biggest fan. Wait until my wife hears about this." Clint smiled politely and took his middle seat. By the window sat Betty Carter, an elderly woman who was knitting something purple. "Hello," she said, barely looking up from her work. "Is this your first time to New York?" "No, ma'am," Clint replied, grateful for her calm manner. "I've been many times." "Me too. I'm visiting my granddaughter. She just had twins. Betty showed him a picture on her phone of 2 tiny babies. Congratulations, Clint said. That's wonderful. As more passengers boarded, many stopped by row 32, surprised to see the famous director squeezed into a middle seat in economy. Flight attendants passed by, doing double takes. One of them, Nancy Brown, paused beside his row. Mr. Eastwood, would you like to move to, she began. I'm fine here, thank you, he interrupted gently. He had no intention of causing a scene or getting special treatment now. That wasn't the point. Once the plane was fully boarded, Clint noticed the first-class cabin was indeed full. The group of men in suits had taken their seats there, still talking loudly. One of them, the man with the red tie, kept looking back, toward economy class. I can't believe they put you back here, George said, still excited to be sitting next to a celebrity. Don't they know who you are? It doesn't matter who I am, Clint replied. What matters is what's right. The flight attendants began their safety demonstration. Clint turned his attention to the small screen on the seat in front of him. He wasn't going to watch a movie. He was planning his next steps. As the plane took off, Betty offered him a piece of candy. For your ears, she explained. Helps with the pressure. Clint thanked her and accepted the candy. For the next hour, he chatted quietly with Betty about her family. She had no idea who he was, which was refreshing. George, meanwhile, kept trying to get Clint to talk about his movies. You know, Gran Torino changed my life, George said. The way your character learned to see beyond his prejudices, it made me think about my own attitudes. Despite his annoyance at the situation, Clint appreciated the sincere comment. I'm glad it meant something to you, he said. Halfway through the flight, Clint got up to use the restroom. As he waited in the aisle, he noticed the man with the red tie coming from the first-class cabin. The man stopped when he saw Clint. Mr. Eastwood, he said, extending his hand. I'm Jeff Morgan, Executive VP at Summit Investments. We're big fans of your work. I was surprised to see you in economy. Clint shook his hand but said nothing. If you're ever interested in discussing investment opportunities for your production company, we should talk, Jeff continued, handing Clint a business card. Clint took the card and put it in his pocket. Thank you, he said simply. Back at his seat, Clint thought about the connection. Summit Investments must be the partner company the airline had mentioned. They had taken his seat, and probably others, to accommodate these executives. For the rest of the flight, Clint remained quiet. He wasn't angry, not exactly. He was disappointed. This wasn't about comfort or status. It was about respecting agreements. In his long career, Clint had built his reputation on honoring his word. He expected the same from others. As the plane began its descent into New York, Clint made his decision. This situation represented something bigger than one flight, one seat or one passenger. It was about how companies treated people. Betty finished her knitting, a small purple hat for one of her new grandchildren. Would you like to see a picture of my daughter? She asked, showing him another photo. She looks like you, Clint said kindly. She has your smile. When the plane landed, Clint let other passengers get off first. He watched as the first-class passengers, including Jeff Morgan and his colleagues, left the plane. Then he made his way slowly up the aisle. At the door, Nancy, the flight attendant, touched his arm. Mr. Eastwood, I want to apologize for what happened, she said quietly. It wasn't right. It wasn't your fault, he replied. As he walked through the terminal, Clint pulled out his phone and called his lawyer again. Paul, I've been thinking about a new project, he said. It's about promises, respect, and doing the right thing. And I think Pacific Airlines just gave me the perfect story. Clint Eastwood settled into his hotel room in New York. It was a spacious suite at the Plaza Hotel with a view of Central Park. After the cramped economy seat on the flight, the large room felt especially welcoming. He placed his small suitcase on the bed and walked to the window. The city lights sparkled as evening fell. His phone rang. It was Paul Bennett, his lawyer and friend of 30 years. I can be at your hotel in 20 minutes, Paul said. What's this about an airline? Explain when you get here, Clint replied. And bring your notepad. While waiting, Clint ordered a simple dinner from room service. Grilled chicken, steamed vegetables, and a glass of water. He wasn't a man of fancy tastes despite his wealth and fame. He sat at the desk and wrote down his thoughts about what had happened on the flight. He wanted to be clear about his plans. A knock at the door announced Paul's arrival. The lawyer entered, carrying a leather briefcase. At 65, Paul was younger than Clint, but still one of the older attorneys in Hollywood. His gray hair was neatly trimmed, and he wore a navy blue suit despite the late hour. "Good to see you, Clint," Paul said, shaking his hand. They sat at a small table near the window. "Now tell me what happened with Pacific Airlines that has you so concerned." Clint explained the situation, how he had booked a first-class seat, months in advance only to be bumped to economy without proper notice or compensation. He described the group from Summit Investments who had taken the first-class seats and how the airline staff had seemed embarrassed but helpless. "It's not about me, Paul," Clint said. "I can handle a 5-hour flight in a middle seat. It's about respect and keeping promises. How many other people does this happen to who don't have a voice?" Paul nodded, taking notes. "You could sue for breach of contract. It would be straightforward." Clint shook his head. "I don't want money. I want change." "What did you have in mind?" Paul asked, leaning forward. "I'm thinking about my next film project," Clint said, his eyes lighting up with purpose. "A story about corporate ethics and how big companies treat ordinary people. Pacific Airlines will be the inspiration." Paul raised his eyebrows. "That's quite a response to being bumped from first class." "It's more than that. It's about a culture that thinks it's acceptable to break promises when it's convenient." Clint pulled out the business card Jeff Morgan had given him. "And I think we should start by meeting with Summit Investments. They're part of this story, too." The next morning, Clint and Paul sat in a conference room at the Summit Investments office in Manhattan. The large table could seat 20 people, but only 4 were present. Clint, Paul, Jeff Morgan, the man with the red tie from the plane, and Linda Gray, Summit's chief legal officer. "Mr. Eastwood, this is an unexpected pleasure," Jeff said, looking both excited and confused. "When my assistant said you wanted a meeting, I assumed it was about investment opportunities." "In a way it is," Clint replied. His voice was calm but carried authority. "I'm here to discuss my next film project." "You want Summit to finance a film?" Linda asked, looking surprised. "No, I want to talk about a film inspired by my experience with Pacific Airlines yesterday. A film about how corporations treat people when they think no one is watching." Clint looked directly at Jeff. "Summit appears to have a close relationship with Pacific, close enough that they bump paying customers for your executives." Jeff's smile faded. "That was an unfortunate situation. We have a partnership agreement with Pacific, but we never asked them to remove other passengers. Yet you accepted those seats knowing someone else had been moved," Paul pointed out. Linda shifted uncomfortably. "Mr. Eastwood, what exactly are you proposing?" "I'm not proposing anything," Clint said. "I'm informing you that my next project will explore these issues. Pacific Airlines and possibly Summit Investments will feature prominently." Jeff's face paled. "Using our actual company names? That could be seen as defamatory." Paul smiled slightly. "Only if the portrayal is false and causes harm. Truth is an absolute defense against defamation claims. And I'm very careful about accuracy in my films," Clint added. Linda whispered something to Jeff, who nodded quickly. "Mr. Eastwood," Jeff said, his voice now serious, "we value our company's reputation highly. Is there some way we could resolve this situation?" "I'm interested in solutions, not problems," Clint replied. "But those solutions need to help everyone, not just me." "What did you have in mind?" Linda asked. "A meeting with Pacific Airlines. Summit clearly has influence with them. I want both companies to review their policies on how they treat customers. Real change, not just a personal apology." Jeff looked relieved. "We can arrange that. Our CEO, Bill Harris, sits on Pacific's board of directors." "Good," Clint said, standing up. "Have them contact Paul to set up a meeting. And Jeff, you might want to ask yourself, if you're willing to benefit from someone else losing what they paid for, what does that say about your company's values?" Jeff had no answer. As Clint and Paul left the building, Paul shook his head, in admiration. Reminding them that you make films that reach millions of people was a nice touch, Paul said. I guarantee they'll be calling Pacific Airlines before we reach the lobby. I don't want to threaten anyone, Clint replied. I just want them to do the right thing, and sometimes people need a little motivation. Back at his hotel, Clint received a call from Mary, his assistant in Los Angeles. How did the meeting go? She asked. They're arranging a meeting with Pacific Airlines, Clint said. But there's something else I need you to do. Can you find out how often Pacific bumps passengers from their paid seats? Look for any lawsuits or complaints filed with the transportation department. I'll get right on it, Mary said. Also, your meeting about the new Western film is confirmed for tomorrow at 2 p.m. Thank you, Mary, Clint said. Oh, and one more thing. Call Jake Green at Malpaso Productions. Tell him I have an idea for a new project. After the call, Clint went for a walk in Central Park. The fresh air helped him think. This wasn't just about one flight anymore. It had become something bigger. Throughout his career, Clint had made films that challenged viewers to think about justice, dignity, and doing what's right, even when it's difficult. This situation felt like another opportunity to send an important message. His phone rang again. It was Paul. That was fast, Paul said. The CEO of Pacific Airlines, Robert Ward, wants to meet tomorrow morning. Bill Harris from Summit will be there too. They're taking this seriously, Clint observed. Having Clint Eastwood suggest he might make a film about your company's poor ethics tends to get attention, Paul replied with a chuckle. Especially when you've directed films seen by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. The next morning, Clint dressed simply in a light blue shirt and gray pants. He wasn't trying to intimidate anyone with his appearance. His presence was enough. Paul met him in the hotel lobby, and they took a car to Pacific Airlines' New York office. In the car, Paul showed Clint some information on his tablet. Mary sent this over. In the past year, Pacific Airlines has bumped over 3,000 passengers from their confirmed seats, more than any other major airline. Most of those people received minimal compensation. Clint nodded thoughtfully. This isn't just about one passenger or one flight. No, it's a pattern, Paul agreed. And patterns make for compelling stories. They arrived at a tall glass building in Midtown Manhattan. At the reception desk, a nervous young man escorted them to a conference room on the top floor. There, Robert Ward, the CEO of Pacific Airlines, and Bill Harris, the CEO of Summit Investments, waited with their legal teams. Mr. Eastwood, Robert said, standing to shake his hand. We're deeply sorry about what happened on your flight yesterday. It was completely unacceptable. Clint shook his hand but didn't smile. I appreciate that. But I'm more interested in talking about the other 3,000 passengers who had similar experiences last year. Robert's smile faltered. He glanced at his legal team, surprised that Clint had this information. I think we have a lot to discuss, Clint said, taking a seat at the table, and I hope you're ready to make some real changes. The conference room at Pacific Airlines' New York office fell silent. Clint Eastwood sat calmly at the large table, his face showing no emotion. Across from him, Robert Ward, the CEO of Pacific Airlines, looked uncomfortable. Next to Robert sat Bill Harris, the CEO of Summit Investments. Their lawyers and assistants filled the remaining seats. 3,000 passengers, Robert finally said. I wasn't aware the number was that high. That's part of the problem, Clint replied. When companies don't track how often they break promises to customers, it becomes too easy to keep doing it. Paul Bennett, Clint's lawyer, opened a folder and slid some papers across the table. These are reports from the transportation department. Pacific Airlines had the highest rate of bumping passengers among major airlines last year. Robert picked up the papers and frowned as he read them. He passed them to his chief lawyer, Susan Miller, who whispered something in his ear. Mr. Eastwood, Robert said, I want to personally apologize for your experience. We've already fired the manager who approved moving you from first class. Don't do that, Clint said firmly. That person was just following company policy. This isn't about punishing one employee. It's about changing the system. Bill Harris cleared his throat. Perhaps we should discuss how to resolve this situation quickly and quietly. Clint looked at Bill with steady eyes. There's nothing to hide here. I'm not interested in money or special treatment. I want Pacific Airlines to change how they treat all passengers. What exactly are you asking for? Robert asked. Clint nodded to Paul, who pulled out another document and handed copies to everyone at the table. We've drafted a proposed passenger respect policy, Paul explained. It includes fair compensation for bumped passengers, a transparent system for deciding who gets bumped when necessary, and special considerations for elderly passengers and families with children. Robert and his team read through the document. Susan Miller pointed out several items to Robert, who nodded slowly. These changes would cost millions to implement, Robert said. And how much would a film about Pacific Airlines' poor treatment of passengers cost your company? Paul asked. Mr. Eastwood's films are seen by hundreds of millions of people worldwide. Clint raised his hand slightly. This isn't a threat. I'm going to make this film either way. But I'd rather tell a story about a company that recognized its mistakes and fixed them. Bill Harris leaned forward. Robert, I think we should consider this carefully. Summit Investments values our partnership with Pacific, but we also value our public image. Robert looked at his team, then back at Clint. We need time to review these proposals. Take all the time you need, Clint said, standing up. I'll be in New York for 3 more days. After that, I return to Los Angeles to begin pre-production on my next project. As Clint and Paul left the building, Paul smiled. You didn't even have to raise your voice. Sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one people listen to most carefully, Clint replied. Back at his hotel, Clint called Jake Green, the head of his production company, Malpaso Productions. Jake, I need you to start researching a new film project, Clint said. It's about corporate ethics and how big companies treat ordinary people. Sounds interesting, Jake replied. What inspired this? Clint explained what had happened on his flight and the meetings that followed. So you're actually going to make a film about this airline? Jake asked. Yes and no, Clint said. I'm going to make a film inspired by this situation. Whether Pacific Airlines becomes the hero or villain of the story depends on what they do. Next. The following morning, Clint attended his scheduled meeting about the Western film he had been planning to direct. The producers were excited to work with him, but Clint found his mind drifting to the airline project. This news story felt more urgent, more relevant to people's lives today. After the meeting, Clint walked through Times Square. Despite his age, he enjoyed walking. It helped him think. People occasionally recognized him, but most New Yorkers were too busy to stop. Those who did notice him simply nodded respectfully and continued on their way. His phone rang. It was Paul. Pacific Airlines and Summit Investments want another meeting, Paul said. Tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. They didn't waste any time, Clint observed. I also got a call from a reporter at the New York Times, Paul added. Someone leaked information about your meeting with Pacific. They're asking for a comment. Clint thought, for a moment. Tell them I have no comment at this time. This isn't about publicity. That evening, Clint had dinner with an old friend, Jim Carson, a retired actor who had appeared in several of Clint's films. They met at a quiet restaurant on the Upper East Side. I heard about your flight trouble, Jim said as they ate. News travels fast in our circles. It's not just about my flight, Clint explained. It's about how companies treat people when they think no one is watching. Jim nodded. You always did have a strong sense of justice. That's why your films resonate with so many people. At my age, I don't have time for projects that don't matter, Clint said. If I can use my position to help others, I should. When Clint returned to his hotel, the front desk clerk handed him an envelope. Inside was a letter from Robert Ward, CEO of Pacific Airlines. Mr. Eastwood, the letter began, after careful consideration, we would like to discuss implementing many of the changes you proposed. We believe they will not only address your concerns but also improve our service for all passengers. I look forward to our meeting tomorrow. The next morning, Clint and Paul arrived at Pacific Airlines' office to find a different atmosphere. The conference room had fewer people. Only Robert Ward and Bill Harris were present without their teams of lawyers. Mr. Eastwood, Mr. Bennett, Robert greeted them. We've reviewed your proposal and have made some decisions. Robert placed a document on the table. This is our new passenger rights and respect policy. It incorporates most of your suggestions with some practical adjustments. Clint and Paul read through the document. It included fair compensation for bumped passengers, a transparent priority system that protected elderly travelers and families, and better training for staff. We're prepared to implement these changes immediately, Robert said. We've also established a fund of $5 million to compensate previously bumped passengers. Clint looked up from the document. This is a good start. There's more, Bill Harris added. Summit Investments is revising our partnership agreement with Pacific. We will no longer request special treatment that impacts other passengers. Why? The change of heart? Paul asked. Robert sighed. Frankly, we ran the numbers. The potential damage to our brand from negative publicity could exceed $500 million in lost business and stock value. But more importantly, your proposal made us realize we've drifted from our company values. Pacific Airlines was founded on the idea of treating people with respect. And Summit Investments doesn't want to be associated with a company that mistreats its customers, Bill added. Clint nodded slowly. Actions matter more than words. I'll be watching to see if these changes really happen. We understand, Robert said. We'd like to invite you to be part of our customer advisory board to help monitor these changes. I'm not looking for a job, Clint replied. But I know some good consumer advocates who would be perfect for that role. As they left the meeting, Paul looked at Clint with curiosity. Are you still going to make the film? Clint smiled slightly. Yes, but the story just got more interesting. Now it's about redemption, not just criticism. Paul laughed. You got a major airline to change its policies and create a $5 million compensation fund, all because they bumped you to economy class. That might be your most impressive production yet. It's not about me, Clint said for what felt like the 100th time. It's about doing what's right even when it's difficult. As they walked through the lobby, Clint noticed a family at the check-in counter. Parents with two small children looking tired and frustrated as an airline employee explained something to them. Clint paused, watching the scene unfold. I wonder if those policy changes are already in effect, he said quietly. Clint Eastwood walked toward the family at the check-in counter. He could see the mother was close to tears while the father tried to calm two young children. The airline employee looked stressed and kept typing on her computer. I'm sorry, but we don't have 4 seats together, the employee said. The best I can do is split you up. The father shook his head. Our children are 4 and 6 years old. They can't sit alone. Clint stepped forward. Excuse me, he said to the employee. Her name tag read, Carol. Isn't there a new policy about keeping families together? Carol looked up, startled to see Clint Eastwood standing there. Mr. Eastwood, Yes, we received a memo this morning, but the system hasn't been updated yet. Robert Ward, who had been walking Clint and Paul to the exit, rushed over. What seems to be the problem? Carol explained. The situation. Robert turned to the family. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, the father said. Joe and Emma Wilson. Mr. and Mrs. Wilson, I apologize for the confusion. We've just implemented a new family seating policy. Robert looked at Carol. Please find 4 seats together for the Wilson family, even if it means upgrading them to first class at no extra charge. Carol's eyes widened, but she nodded and began typing quickly. Yes, sir. Emma Wilson looked relieved. Thank you so much. This means a lot to us. Robert handed them his business card. If you have any other issues, please contact me directly. As the family moved away with their boarding passes, Robert turned to Clint. That's the real-world impact of the changes you suggested. Small moments that make a big difference to our passengers. Clint nodded. It's a good start. That afternoon, Clint had lunch with Jake Green, who had flown in from Los Angeles. They sat at a quiet table in the hotel restaurant. I've been thinking about the film, Jake said. A story about corporate ethics could be powerful, but it needs a human center. Clint took a sip of water. It's not just about companies. It's about the people who make decisions within those companies. Have you thought about who might write the screenplay? Jake asked. I have someone in mind, Clint replied. But first I want to see if Pacific Airlines follows through on their promises. After lunch, Clint received a call from Paul. You might want to turn on the news, Paul said. Clint turned on the television in his hotel room. A news anchor was reporting on a major announcement from Pacific Airlines. In a surprise move, Pacific Airlines has introduced what they call a passenger bill of rights, promising fair treatment and compensation for all travelers, the anchor said. The airline's stock price jumped 3% following the announcement, with industry analysts praising the move as forward-thinking. The screen showed Robert Ward at a press conference. Every passenger deserves respect and fair treatment, Robert was saying. These new policies reflect our commitment to putting customers first. Clint's phone rang again. It was Robert Ward. I hope you don't mind that we moved quickly, Robert said. After our meeting, it seemed clear that these changes were long overdue. I'm glad to see it, Clint replied. The real test will be how well these policies work in practice. We'd like your input on a training video for our staff, Robert said. Your perspective could be valuable. Clint thought for a moment. I'm not looking to become the face of Pacific Airlines, but I know some good people who could help with that training. I understand, Robert said. By the way, Summit Investments has also announced new ethical guidelines for all their corporate partnerships. After the call, Clint contacted his screenwriter friend Alan Ross. They had worked together on several films in the past. I have an idea for a new project, Clint explained. It's about standing up for what's right in a world where corporations often forget the human impact of their decisions. Sounds intriguing, Alan said. Is this based on something that happened to you? It was inspired by a real situation, Clint admitted. But the film needs to be bigger than one incident or one airline. The next day, Clint flew back to Los Angeles. This time he was on a different airline, but he noticed something interesting at the airport. The Pacific Airlines check-in counters had new signs displaying their passenger bill of rights. Staff wore pins that said, "Respect every journey." 3 weeks later, Clint sat in his office at Malpazzo Productions. Jake and Alan were with him, discussing the screenplay for the new film, now titled The Promise. The script is coming along. Well, Alan said, the main character is a retired judge who gets mistreated by a powerful corporation and decides to fight back, not for himself, but for everyone who's been wronged. I like that he uses his knowledge of the law rather than any kind of violence, Clint said. The power of standing firm on principles. Jake's assistant knocked on the door. Sorry to interrupt, but there's a package for Mr. Eastwood. The package contained a letter from Robert Ward and a report. The letter explained that Pacific Airlines had implemented all their promised changes. The report showed customer satisfaction. Scores had increased by 15% in just 3 weeks. Also in the package was a newspaper article about another airline, National Airways, that had just announced their own passenger bill of rights, very similar to Pacific's. It's spreading, Jake observed, reading the article. National Airways is Pacific's biggest competitor. When one company raises the standard, others have to follow, Clint said. Mary, Clint's assistant, entered the office. Mr. Eastwood, I have some interesting news. Remember George Hill, the man who sat next to you in economy class on that flight? Clint nodded. He remembered the excited fan who couldn't believe he was sitting next to Clint Eastwood. He posted about his experience on social media, Mary continued. It went viral. Over 2 million people have read his story about how you didn't complain or demand special treatment, but instead worked behind the scenes to change the system for everyone. I didn't do it for publicity, Clint said. I know, Mary replied. That's why people are so impressed. Later that week, Clint received another call from Robert Ward. Mr. Eastwood, I thought you'd like to know that our policy changes have been even more successful than we expected. Customer complaints are down 40% and bookings are up 12%. That's good to hear, Clint said. Our board of directors was initially concerned about the cost of these changes, Robert continued. But the positive publicity and increased customer loyalty have already offset those costs. In fact, our market analysts now project a potential $300 million increase in company value over the next year, if these trends continue. Sometimes doing the right thing is also good business, Clint observed. Indeed, Robert agreed. By the way, I heard you're making a film inspired by this situation. We're not asking for any editorial control, but we'd be happy to provide any information that might be helpful. I appreciate that, Clint said. The film isn't really about Pacific Airlines specifically. It's about the larger issue of corporate responsibility and human dignity. After the call, Clint looked out the window of his office. The view showed the hills of Los Angeles in the distance. He thought about how a seemingly small incident, being bumped from first class, had led to changes that would affect thousands of travelers. That evening, Clint received an email from Betty Carter, the elderly woman who had sat next to him on the flight. She had given him her email address when they landed in New York. "Dear Mr. Eastwood," she wrote, "I just flew to visit my other daughter in Chicago. The Pacific Airlines staff was so helpful and kind. When they found out I was traveling alone, they made sure I had assistance at every step. The flight attendant told me about the new policies for elderly passengers and said you had something to do with these changes. I didn't realize who you were when we met on that flight, but I'm grateful for what you've done. Sometimes it takes someone with a strong voice to speak up for all of us. Thank you." Clint smiled as he read the email. This was the real measure of success, not the money saved or earned, but the real people whose lives were made a little better. The $500 million lesson he had taught Pacific Airlines was working, not just for their bottom line, but for the passengers they served. The next day, as filming began on The Promise, Clint felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Sometimes the most important victories were the quiet ones that changed systems, not just situations. 1 year later, Clint Eastwood stood at the back of a crowded theater in Los Angeles. The audience watched the final scenes of his new film, The Promise. On screen, the main character, played by actor Sam Elliott, stood before a company board, speaking quietly but firmly about the importance of keeping promises and treating people with dignity. As the credits began to roll, the audience erupted in applause. The lights came up and people turned to see Clint standing there. A second wave of applause filled the room, louder than the first. Jake Green approached him with a wide smile. "They love it, Clint. The early reviews are incredible." Clint nodded, pleased but not surprised. The film told a powerful story that connected with people. It wasn't specifically about airlines. In the film, the conflict involved a healthcare company, but the core message about corporate ethics and human dignity remained the same. After the screening, a small reception was held in the theater lobby. Film critics, industry executives, and several actors from the movie mingled and discussed the film. Clint noticed a familiar face approaching him, Robert Ward, the CEO of Pacific Airlines. "Mr. Eastwood," Robert said, extending his hand. "Congratulations on a remarkable film." "Thank you for coming," Clint replied, shaking his hand. "I didn't expect to see you here." "I wouldn't have missed it," Robert said. "I know the film isn't specifically about our company, but I recognize the inspiration behind it." Clint smiled slightly. "How are those new policies working out?" "Better than we could have imagined," Robert answered. "Our customer satisfaction ratings are now the highest in the industry, and our stock price has increased 30% over the past year." "Good to hear." Robert lowered his voice. "You know, that $500 million figure we feared losing, it turns out we gained nearly that much instead. Our market value has increased by $470 million since we implemented the Passenger Bill of Rights." "Sometimes, doing the right thing pays off in unexpected ways," Clint observed. "We've become a case study at several business schools," Robert added. "They're teaching our story as an example of how ethical business practices can create financial success." Paul Bennett joined them carrying 2 glasses of water. He handed one to Clint. "Robert, good to see you again. Have you told Clint about the industry changes?" Robert nodded. "I was just getting to that. Mr. Eastwood, what started with Pacific Airlines has spread across the entire industry. The Transportation Department has now adopted many of our policies as standard regulations for all airlines." "That's quite an impact from one bumped passenger," Paul said with a smile. "It wasn't about me," Clint reminded them, as he had so many times before. We know, Robert said. That's what made it so powerful. The next morning, Clint read the film reviews in his home in Carmel, California. The critics praised The Promise for its thoughtful exploration of corporate ethics and individual dignity. Several reviews noted that the film felt especially relevant in today's world where large companies often seemed disconnected from the people they served. Clint's phone rang. It was Mary, his assistant. "Good morning, Mr. Eastwood. I have some news you might find interesting. Summit Investments is featuring your film in their corporate training program." "Is that so?" Clint asked, surprised. "Yes." Bill Harris called to ask permission. They're using it to teach their executives about ethical decision-making and the importance of putting people before profits. Later that day, Clint received another call, this time from a journalist named Karen Lee from the Wall Street Journal. She was writing an article about the changes in the airline industry over the past year. "Mr. Eastwood, sources tell me that your experience with Pacific Airlines was the catalyst for their new passenger Bill of Rights, which has now transformed the entire industry. Would you care to comment?" "Sometimes it takes standing firm on principles to create real change," Clint said simply. "The industry has seen customer complaints drop by 30% across all major airlines," Karen continued. "And Pacific Airlines' success has shown that treating customers with respect is actually good for business. Did you anticipate this level of impact?" "I just wanted companies to keep their promises," Clint replied. Everything else followed from that. After the call, Clint went for a walk along the beach near his home. He thought about how a seemingly small incident had led to such significant changes. It wasn't about the power of celebrity, though that had certainly helped get his foot in the door. It was about standing up for what was right, not just for himself, but for everyone. 6 months later, Clint attended the Academy Awards. The Promise had been nominated in several categories, including Best Picture and Best Director. As he walked the red carpet, reporters asked about the film's impact. "Your film has changed how many companies approach customer service," one reporter said. "Did you intend to create a movement?" "I just wanted to tell a story about doing the right thing," Clint answered. People connected with that message. Inside the theater, Clint was surprised to see George Hill, the excited fan who had sat next to him in economy class on that fateful flight. George was now a guest of Pacific Airlines, which was sponsoring part of the event. "Mr. Eastwood," George called out, approaching him. "I can't believe I'm seeing you again. That flight changed my life." "How so?" Clint asked. After posting about our experience, I was contacted by Pacific Airlines. They asked me to join their customer advisory board. Now I'm working in their corporate ethics department full-time. George shook his head in wonder. "And it all started because you were bumped from first class." Later that evening, The Promise won 3 Academy Awards, including Best Original Screenplay for Alan Ross. In his acceptance speech, Alan thanked Clint not just for directing the film, but for inspiring it through his actions. "Some stories come from imagination," Alan said, holding his Oscar. "But the best ones come from people who live by their principles and show us all how to stand up for what's right." When Clint returned to his seat, he found a note waiting for him. It was from Robert Ward. "The lesson you taught our company was worth far more than $500 million, the note read. "You showed us that success comes not just from what we achieve, but from how we treat people along the way. Thank you." 2 years after that flight where he was bumped from first class, Clint Eastwood boarded a Pacific Airlines plane bound for New York. This time, he had a first-class ticket that no one suggested changing. As he settled into his seat, a flight attendant approached him. "Mr. Eastwood, thank you for flying with us today," she said. "You might not know this, but every new employee at Pacific Airlines learns about the Eastwood Standard during their training." "The what?" Clint asked, puzzled. "The Eastwood Standard. It's what we call our commitment to treating every passenger with dignity and respect, and always keeping our promises. Your story is literally part of our company history now." Clint smiled, slightly. "Just make sure everyone gets what they paid for, that's all I ever wanted." As the plane took off, Clint looked out the window at the clouds below. One man standing up for what was right had changed an entire industry and improved the travel experience for millions of people. The financial impact A $500 million lesson that ultimately benefited both the company and its customers was significant. But the real value was in the reminder that principles matter, promises should be kept, and treating people with dignity is always the right choice. In the end, it was never about the seat in first class. It was about standing up for everyone who had ever felt powerless against a big company. And that was a lesson worth far more than $500 million.